went into the first cave I've ever been in. For those of you who know the story, I wasn't wise enough to bring a headlamp, but rather just a candle. And if you were to ask, how did that work out for you? It was pretty bad. But I could never really explain to people what it was like getting stuck in a cave, because it sounds very weird. Most people, normal people, don't go into caves anyway. But the only way to really explain it is for people to be in the cave themselves. Most of the people I see here, and welcome to you all, have been in caves at one point or another, usually with Livnot, because most other people don't go into caves. And that was really the best way to explain, because throughout history, we're very claustrophobic people. And I think the classic example of us being claustrophobic is something that King David wrote in Psalms, that is at the bottom of source number 2 for those who have a source sheet. And we say it on every happy day, and it's one of the most famous prayers. It's just a one-liner, and it starts, "I called out to God from the narrow place. God answered me in the wide open places." That was written by somebody who was claustrophobic. I am incredibly claustrophobic today. As I get older, I get more claustrophobic. It's very strange. I used to be a cave explorer for 3 years, almost every day. I was in caves for hours, once even for a day and a night, with no fear at all. And after getting stuck, things got a little tough. It got so bad that once when I took a Livnot group to a cave, I couldn't go in. So I said, you know, guys, we're going to have a little challenge today. You guys go in, try to find your way. I'll meet you at the other end. And that worked out pretty good, but I realized that's temporary. And I went because I knew I couldn't continue doing this, by remote control. So I actually, went to somebody, a professional. I said, "You got to help me here. I don't know what's happened to me. I can't go into caves anymore." And I was sure it had something to do with getting stuck years before. But then that should have happened immediately. And the person told me something very fascinating. He said, usually fear of something has to do with your being a control freak. I said, control freak? I'm the opposite of a control freak. And he said, that's what most control freaks say, that they're the opposite of control freak. You have to do things outside of caves that you have to let go. And it's helped me, so I can actually go into caves again today. But I think it's something very Jewish. And we're coming up to Passover, and it's not a secret, we always say, and it's a well-known fact that when we say Egypt in Hebrew, we're saying the narrow place. Egypt was a narrow place for us. We felt claustrophobic there, not physically, but we were slaves. So that when we say Egypt in English, we say Egypt. We think of pyramids and the Sphinx and etc. When we say it in Hebrew, we're implying you were in a narrow place. Remember that. You were in a narrow place, and getting to the land of Israel means getting out into the open. That's why the desert was somewhat therapeutic for the Jewish people. So I called out to God from the narrow place. God answered me in the wide open places. And in general, as anyone who's really been to a cave experience knows, as the title says, caves are transitional zones. I've rarely seen a person to go into a cave, but really into the cave, to get the feeling of the cave and come out the same person. Something happens there. There's something transitional that happens. It doesn't have to be life-changing, that you change the way you look at the world, but it can be. And if you get stuck in a cave and you're there against your will, then bad and good things happen. I wanted to take a look at 4 people who were cavers, 4 Jewish cavers. And they weren't all in physical caves, but they were definitely in caves. and try to see what that did to them. How was it transitional for them? Obviously, I'm in big parentheses saying this is something that can happen now, as we are forced to be in our narrow places, and some of us may be on the verge of losing it at times, and it's totally normal. I can definitely identify with that. We will come out, when we come out, different. There's no question about it. As singular persons, as families, as society, as the world. That's no secret. So I want to start off with Joseph. There are other examples of people who were in caves. Noah, for instance, in the ark, there's no question. There was a very cave-like existence. He had no choice, as it were. Once he was in there, he was in there. And he wasn't alone, but he did not have freedom. And Lot, Abraham's nephew, was in a cave. That's a whole different story. I want to just take 4 examples and briefly go over them. The first is Joseph. Joseph is thrown into a cistern by his own brothers. Joseph's experience is not just one of getting stuck in a cave like somebody, like me, who I didn't know what I was doing. I went into the wrong cave. I wasn't looking. I fell into a pit. I couldn't get out. He felt that his own brothers were throwing him in there. So he not just wanted to get out, but he wanted a connection to his brothers, and he was being left there to die, as it were, by his own brothers. And as you can see from source number 1, he came with his robe, the striped robe that they hated and that he wore very proudly, and he wasn't really sensitive enough to realize what he was doing to his brothers. The whole story, it's like you want to yell, Joseph, quit doing that. Quit telling on your brothers to your dad. That's not going to be good for you. But he just doesn't seem to know or care. And he's in his own dream world, literally. And they took him and he threw him into the cistern. And the cistern was empty and had no water in it. Of course, there's a famous description that Rashi brings that, why does it say the cistern was empty and had no water in it? It's enough to say that the cistern was empty and we'll understand that there's no water in it. But rather, there was snakes and scorpions in the cistern. I've rarely found snakes and scorpions in cisterns. They won't really last very long if they're down there. But there's no question that that's not what was bothering him at the time. What was bothering him was the fact that his brothers were eating lunch. Because as soon as they threw him in there, they sat down to eat a meal. And this is definitely emotional eating. I've noticed that when we get stuck in places, physically and also emotionally, we eat. That's a very common and normal human reaction. His brothers are eating, and they're right next to him. And afterwards, later on, a few chapters later, we understand that Joseph is crying out to them and begging them to take him out of the cistern. And they're, can you pass the salt over there? They're just eating. They're ignoring, trying to escape from what they did to Joseph. What's going into his mind? What's going through his mind at this time? Maybe it was this moment that he first realized that he wasn't sensitive enough to his brothers. Even if he was right and that they were doing bad things, he wasn't connected to his brothers. He was mainly connected to himself. And something happened there. And it could have been right then when he screamed and begged, and his brothers just ate, that he realized he didn't invest enough energy in reaching his brothers, in being a brother himself. He was living his own world. He wasn't part of the tribe, literally. So they sold him for 20 pieces of silver. Like, how unbrotherly can you be? But they had an agenda. And later on, he's in another pit. He actually uses the word pit when he's in jail in Egypt, because Remember Potiphar's husband, Potiphar, who is the husband of Potiphar's wife, of course. When he thought that Joseph was fooling around, or he knew or he didn't know with his wife, he threw him in jail, and it's called the pit. Here he goes again into a pit, but this time he's totally different. This time, instead of just thinking about himself, he's helping the butler and the two, high officers in Pharaoh's cabinet. He's helping them, and he's not just thinking about himself. He has definitely changed. And so he says, please remember me and get me out of this place, because I was surely kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. I didn't do anything to deserve it, and they put me in this pit. But notice when he says I didn't do anything to deserve it, is he talking about he didn't do anything to deserve it to get thrown into the cistern by his brothers? Or he didn't do anything to deserve it to get thrown into the pit in Egypt? That's a good question. I think he understood by this time. I wouldn't say maybe he deserved to get thrown into the cistern, but he understood his brothers. Something happened to Joseph in that pit, I believe, when he couldn't get out, and he heard his brothers eating and chewing and belching or whatever they're doing during the meal. He realizes he has made a mistake, even though maybe his brothers weren't really very righteous themselves. And I definitely connect to that, because when I was stuck in the cave all by myself, because I was too stupid to follow the rule that you're not allowed to go into a cave when you're exploring by yourself, kind of obvious. This is something that went through my mind. I was not thinking about Joseph at the time. I was thinking, what did I do to deserve this? And what can I do to get out of here? And the only thing I could think of was to try to be someone who thinks more about others. Not that that was one of the big changes that happened. I'm still working on it. It's very, very hard. Luckily I married someone who's a kibbutznik. She was born on a kibbutz. She's a team player. She was born a team player. So I know, and I'm told now and then that I have to be a team player, but I got to work on it. I got to work on it. For her, it's in her DNA. I have to work on it. But that was something that I definitely thought about when I was stuck in the cave. And only afterwards, I realized that I totally identify with Joseph. Moving along, we have a different story with David. David goes by choice to his caves. David is not thrown into a cave. David is going to be king. David doesn't get thrown into caves. David chooses to go in caves. And here, I believe we're talking about a totally different theme. His caving experience does something else to him. His transition is different than Joseph's, because David is already a team player. And see what happens. He's being chased by Saul the king. And he goes from there and he escaped to the cave of Adullam, which is near Bet Shemesh, about halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And his brothers and all of his father's house heard, and they descended to him there, because it's down in the lowlands. And he was joined, listen to see, who joins him besides his family? Who was joined by all men who were in trouble, all men who were in debt, and all men who were in trauma, or whose soul was bitter. And he was the leader, and 400 men were with him. So he's got really a ragtag army there. And look what he's doing. He is allowing himself, he could say, look, I'm going to be king. I don't have time for these shlemiels. What are they doing here? Get these schnooks out of my cave. I'm going to be a king. But no, I feel that in the cave, David was learning how to be a leader. David understood that he was king, not just of the cool people, not just of the sane people, not just of the people who were like the elite. David was king for everybody. I think he learned this when he was a kid too, because his brothers gave him problems also, and his parents perhaps. He was not very loved, even though his name actually means the loved one. David in Hebrew actually means the one who is loved. But here he understood that he is king of everybody, the good and the bad and the ugly, as it were. Later on, he's moving around trying not to get caught by Saul, and they meet at En-Gedi, and I'm guessing that everybody here has been to En-Gedi, on the rocks of the Ibex. And Saul is chasing after him with 3,000 men. They came to the sheep pens, and there was a cave there. And Saul entered to cover his knees, which is a biblical way of saying he's going to the bathroom. But he happened to choose the cave. Bad call on Saul's part. His Secret Service should all have been fired after this. But David and his men were actually in the far ends of the same cave that the king went in to go to the bathroom. I mean, you'd think that they'd, get the sterile area and say, okay, you're clear to go. But they didn't. And David and his men were in that cave, and they were like, okay, this is the day. Go and kill him. And David got up with his knife, but instead of killing Saul, he just cut off the corner of his coat. And he did not let his men attack and kill Saul. And he could have. He definitely could have, but he didn't. And here also, he says, I cannot kill the man who's been anointed by God. That is because I'm also going to be king of the people who were king. And now he is king, I cannot touch him. I think David is displaying here total leadership in both places. And in this case, it's different. He also went through something in that cave. I think he became more of he understood that he was king of everybody when he was there with his 400 people in the beginning. And afterwards, when Saul came by. One of his great moments, I think. One of his great moments, because I think anybody else would have killed that guy who obviously had lost his mind and was trying to kill him, even though he knew that he was going to be king. That's a very beautiful story. For those who like spiders, there's a famous story of why did Saul go into a cave? How did it happen that he would go into a cave without getting checked out? Is that David one day said, this is just a midrash, it's not in the text of the Tanakh, of the Bible, but there's a story that says David asked God, why did you make spiders? They spin their webs and they make silk, but they don't make anything useful out of it, not clothes, not anything. And he says, one day you'll understand. And when Saul was chasing after him in En-Gedi, he ran into a cave, and God caused the spider to quickly make a web over the cave. Came to the cave, he saw a spider web. He said, well, David can't be in here. There's a spider web here. And then he went in. That's just a PS there. But David actually said later on in one of his poems, as you can see towards the end of source number 2, you've lifted me out of the depths. You've granted me life after being deep in a pit. So there was something transitional also for David when he was in that cave. The next caver is not a caver at all. It's Jonah. He had 2 very interesting caves. The first cave, the story of Jonah, of course, is known. He ran away from, he told God, God said, look, you're my prophet. You got to go and help these people. And he's like, no, I'm not going. What are you going to do? We don't really hear about prophets who deny their being a prophet to God and refusing God to be a prophet. Jonah had to learn the hard way. But at the time, he was like, no, why should I go and help these people? They're evil. They don't deserve to be let off the hook. And he ran away. He ran to Jaffa. He got on a boat. And as you can see in source number 3, God caused a big wind to the sea, and there was a great storm. The boat almost capsized. The sailors saw it. They cried out, each man to his God. They weren't even Jewish, okay? I don't want to say even. I mean, they weren't Jewish. But the story is saying that everyone is expected to pray to his God. Certainly a Jewish person should. But Jonah, as opposed to all the other folks, instead of praying, he goes down to the stern of the ship, to the belly of the ship. He lies down. He goes to sleep. I mean, it's almost suicidal. I won't say almost. It's pretty suicidal. And the captain came up to him and said to him, what are you doing? Why are you sleeping? Get up and cry out to your God, which he doesn't do, by the way. Why are you sleeping becomes kind of a phrase here for wake up. And here, I believe, the cave is definitely a wake-up call. no matter what happens, whether it's Joseph or David or Noah or Jonah, the cave is a wake-up call. There are those that have said that actually we all used to be in a cave, and that cave is our mother. I can see there's a new mother here holding her baby, and we were all, just to remind you, I don't know if you guys remember, but we were all in mom once, and we had to go through the birth canal. Now, I don't know what that's like, to have someone go through your birth canal. I probably never will know. I don't know if I want to know. I have deep respect for people who have that happen to them, but we all went through that birth canal. And there are some who say that that was our first caving experience. That was our first claustrophobic experience. Some of us were like, and this is true when I take people to caves, you can see some people are like, God, this is amazing. I could be here all day and all night. And others are like, can you please hurry? We need to get out of here. Like, I don't like this place. And there's people, I understand there's babies that who are like, I know 9 months is up, but I'm having a good time. Like, what's the problem? Why should I come out? I'm having a great time here. And some kids are like, 8.5 months, I'm out of here. There's something about the caving experience that is very womb-like, even though I don't personally, at least consciously remember it, but some say that actually it's implanted deep, deep, deep within our psyches. And there's also something that when you're in a cave and you're in the ground, when you come out, it's kind of like a birthing experience. And I think that's very symbolic for this idea as a cave as a transitional zone. The word for cave in Hebrew is me'ara, which means to be involved in, to be engaged in. And it's as if we're being involved in the earth. We're part of the earth. When we come out, we're not there anymore. It doesn't have that ring in English. That's the beauty of Hebrew, that the cave is a place where you're involved. You don't come out just, I've never seen a person come out of a cave and said, oh, whatever, yeah, it was okay. You either hate it or you love it, usually, most people. And that's part of being engaged. The cave engages you whether you like it or not. So afterwards, of course, Jonah realizes that everybody's going to die, or this is going nowhere, I should say. And he says, just throw me over the boat. And they didn't want to. All those folks were righteous people. They didn't want to do it, but in the end, they threw him over. And whether this happened, whether you believe it or not, it doesn't really matter. But God caused a big fish to swallow Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. And Jonah prayed to his God from the belly of the fish. When he had the choice on the ship, and everybody was praying, all the pagans, all the other folks, they were praying, he wasn't. But now that doesn't have the choice, he's forced, and he can't move around. He is sitting like this. I don't know exactly what happened there, but it definitely didn't smell good. And he was there against his will. There he goes. He prays to God. There are no atheists in foxholes, and there are no atheists in caves when you get stuck. I can tell you. From a former atheist, the caves can do that to you. They can bring you to this understanding that you can't get out of here alone. You need help. And of course, everybody reacts differently, but there's something very spiritual also in a cave. Whether or not you believe in God, the cave experience is something that definitely enhances spirituality, for good and for bad. And Jonah, I can't even imagine what that must have been like for an hour. I mean, it wouldn't have lasted for 5 minutes, but an hour, but 3 days, 3 days and 3 nights. How did he do it? How did he keep his sanity? Did he keep his sanity? When he left that fish, he went on his way to do what he was supposed to do. He still had a lot of issues with God, and he argued with God until the very end. But it's fascinating. Something happened to him in that fish. Perhaps it started in the boat when the captain said, "Why are you sleeping?" And perhaps in the fish, he kind of woke up. Very fascinating story. And very, very powerful. If you can possibly imagine what it must have been like to be in a straitjacket for 3 days without any chance of knowing how long you're going to be there, if you're going to live. But he talks about the future. He says, when he talks to God, when he prays to God, he's not talking about in the past. He's talking about, I'm going to get out of here and I'm going to say thank you to you. And that's what happens. He talks about the future. And I remember the same thing went through my mind when I was stuck. I started talking to God, something I never did before. And the only thing I could say was, look, I don't have anything to say that could convince you to get me out of here. All I can say is, if you do get me out of here, I'm going to be so good when I get out of here. You know, I'm going to do this and that and the other thing. And that was the depressing part, that when I finally got out of the cave, and I don't even know how I did that, but I was kind of depressed because, like, no, I got to be good. But those are the things that happen to you when you're in the cave. The last example is a very famous example, perhaps the most famous caving story in Jewish history. And of course, it has very much to do with the Bar Kokhba period. For those who were in the hiding tunnels, whether you were in the Galilee or in the Bet Shemesh area, where most of these caves are, the story of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai takes place during this revolt, when the Romans want to kill him. And he wasn't totally alone. He went with his son, and he settled in a cave. He sat in a cave, and a miracle happened. You can see in source number 4, a carob tree and a spring were created. Some believe this happened on Mount Meron, near the city of Peki'in. That's the tradition, at least. And so what did they do when they were there? Well, they would pray and they would study. That's what they did beforehand. They continued that in the cave. They took off their clothes and would sit up to their necks in sand, not literally sand, but dirt. The entire day they studied. When it was time to pray, they got dressed and prayed. Afterwards, they took off their clothes and covered themselves in dirt so they wouldn't wear out the clothes, not the people. They lived for 12 years in the cave. This story is told, by the way, 7 different times in the Talmud and the Midrash. So in some of the sources, it says 12 months, in some 12 years. It was a long time. And in the end, Hadrian Caesar died, and the edict was lifted, and Rabbi Shimon doesn't know. I mean, we didn't go out and check. It was like, hey, what do you think? Maybe we can go out now and they won't kill us? They're just having a good time there on a spiritual high, according to some traditions. That's where they wrote the Zohar, the book of splendor, which is the handbook of every Kabbalist. For those of you who've been to Tzfat, you all have been to Tzfat. So according to the story, Elijah came and stood at the entrance to the cave. But he doesn't say, hey guys, you can come out now. Elijah, of course, is long dead, right? But according to the tradition, Elijah is kind of like eternal. And Elijah asks a question. He kind of hints to them. And he says, who will tell Bar Yochai that the Caesar is dead and the decree for his death has been annulled? So they left the cave. In other words, if Elijah hadn't come and told them, they could have been there for 12 more years or 12 more months. It's not as though they were dying to get out of there. We don't have that feeling. Whereas Jonah, Joseph, and David, they definitely want to get out of the cave. And anybody who's been stuck in a cave, you definitely want to get out. They didn't seem to even realize that there was a problem here. They were doing their spiritual work. So they come out of the cave, and this is an incredibly beautiful and powerful idea. They left the cave and they saw people plowing and planting, like doing the basic, very physical, in the now world actions. And he, which could be his son in this case, according to some, they were upset at these people. How can you farm? Like, oh, you're ignoring eternal life and you're focusing on temporary life. They were looking down at farmers as if farmers were like, who are these guys? They're not even spiritual. Oh, they're plowing and doing, getting muddy. How could they have said that? What brings a person to be on such a high spiritual level that you don't even notice even the importance of other people? Perhaps there's a very deep message here, that when you're on your own spiritual trip, even if you're getting to the incredible heights, there's a danger that the sages, when we're telling the story, perhaps are telling us, watch out, because you can be on such a spiritual high, you don't even notice the other person. Kind of like Joseph, but in a positive way that you negatively relate to other people. Oh, they're so temporary. And so everything they gave a harsh look at immediately went up in flames. Again, it's hard to understand exactly what they're talking about. Did they really kill people? Did they really go up in flames? Or did they just assume they kind of related to people as if they were, not worth anything but flames? But then here comes such a beautiful answer in the story. A heavenly voice comes out, as it were, God himself is saying, is upset at Rabbi Shimon and his son, Rabbi Elazar, who were incredibly great people. They were, few people apparently have ever in history gotten to their high level. And yet the story is upset with them, as it were. And there's criticism of them, because the heavenly voice says, have you left the cave in order to destroy my world? Go back to your cave. 5 very powerful words. Go back to your cave. You, as it were, it's very easy for us to say that, right, to them. They were spiritual giants, but still, the story says that they didn't get it, as it were. They got the spiritual part. They didn't get the other part. Life is not just about being spiritual. It's about other people too. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love your fellow person as yourself. It's not just about getting close to the Creator, about understanding the metaphysical. It's also about the physical. That's Judaism. We are a fusion of the physical and the spiritual. And the story drives that point home with those 5 words. Go back to your cave. They returned. They dwelled in the cave for another 12 months, or some say another 1 month. And then a heavenly voice said, leave your cave here. They were actually told, and they left. And then they see someone preparing for Shabbat, which is kind of like a meeting point of the physical and the spiritual during our week. And Rabbi Shimon tells his son, who was apparently the person who was more upset at others, and including the farmers, look how Israel loves doing mitzvot. And his son's mind was finally put at ease. Now, these folks were in the ground for a long time, and obviously their skin, after being covered in dirt all day for years, is not in good shape. So they have to go to the bathhouse and sweat it out. And they let them use, apparently, the bathhouse in Tiberias. They had no money, of course. They let them in there, and that is the way they were actually able to cure their skin condition. I do just want to mention here in parentheses, even though it's not about me, but when I promised that myself and the Creator, that I would never, when I was stuck in a cave, that I would never go back in a cave alone. About a week and a half later, I was already back in another cave alone, even though I promised everything, the moon, to everybody, everybody being myself and God. Within a week and a half, I was back alone in a cave. It's incredibly embarrassing, although I can say it today. But when I went back into the cave alone, I was bit by a tick that was hiding in the earth, and I got cave malaria, which was a different saga. That's another virus-like thing that I'd rather not talk about, but it was terrible. So I understand I had sores all over my body. I know what it's like to be in a cave and getting bitten. These guys were totally bitten, and they were in the bathhouse, and they were allowed by the people of Tiberias, come and use our bathhouse. And then what happens? Rabbi Shimon says to the Tiberians, is there something that needs fixing? You realize what's happened? What a transition this man has made. This spiritual giant, okay? When he came out, he and his son, temporary farmers, and they've just burned things with their eyes. And now, after his going back to the cave, and learning the other part, the other side of the coin of being spiritual, the physical part. He came out and he wasn't just thinking about himself. He was so focused on others that he asked the people of Tiberias, what can I do for you? And they told him, we have a huge cemetery. We don't know where people are buried. We can't walk there. And Rabbi Shimon volunteered to go and fix it. And he fixed it. So even Rabbi Shimon, this giant who can compare themselves to Rabbi Shimon, he's like up there on a spiritual pedestal in Jewish history. Even he, according to the story, the cave was a transitional place for him. And it opened up his vision to not just be spiritual about himself or about ideas, but about real people, real farmers without whom we can't eat today also, right? We're very dependent on folks in the medical profession today, especially, and we're very dependent on people who are growing food. Little by little, we're understanding how important it is to have local farmers, because, you know, if the planes aren't going to fly or the ships aren't going to sail, we're going to need to deal and use local food. And I think that's also just one of the things we need to, you know, the people who studied and have degrees and learn nursing and are doctors, you know, but also the people who are farming, who are getting their hands muddy. Those folks also, we owe them a big thank you also. So I think hopefully this is just part of the transitions that we can pick up from our current experience. And I think it's time to open up and allow people to perhaps say what are some of the transitions they think they feel that they may be going through, they themselves or society in general, or any comments that you'd like to make, questions. Now's a great time.
So if you want, you can raise a hand or just take off your mic and go ahead.
I guess someone's got to be first, right?
Rebecca, Ima.
Hello. So loved everything you said, and thank you, Michael, for doing this so much. Just wanted to say that first of all. But I wanted to talk back to, you know, the first story about going in the cave, and you said how everybody kind of experiences something, you know, when they're there. And for me, absolutely, that was like a pivotal moment for me. I don't even know if you remember, because you've been doing so many of these trips for so long, but I literally remember like just coming out of the cave after being in the dark and singing and being together as a group and just absorbing the experience. And it really hit home for me, like what our ancestors have gone through so that we could be here today and so that this religion could continue on. And I almost feel like that emotion's coming back, even talking about and thinking about being back there again. And I remember just like coming out of the cave and just being flooded with emotion and so appreciative of what my ancestors had done so that we could all still be here continuing on this amazing religion. And just, it was just extremely impactful to me. And I remember like just coming out and like grabbing you and hugging you because I was just like so emotional and I just was like, ah! But yeah, I mean, that definitely for me was like a huge pivotal moment in just being like, it hit me at a different level what it was like, you know, what our ancestors went through and how difficult it was.
Becca, your feelings are mirrored by almost everybody who goes there, including myself and staff who goes all the time and goes back and goes back. That's why we go. It's not manipulative, right? It's not like, let's do something in the cave so that people will feel the connection to the Jewish people. It's let's go to the cave and let people feel what they want to feel. But that's one of the things that often happens. And I think today, you know, how can we complain? We're confined to our homes, not 100%, but pretty much we're staying in our homes. But what a difference, instead of being in a cave with all the icky stuff that goes with caves, and in this case, at any moment, the Romans could come and slaughter you, you know, and you got to be quiet. It's not as though here we can make noise, turn on the music, do whatever we want. I think one of the great themes of coming out of that cave is being appreciative of what we have. And the question now is, I mean, so Livnot people go to caves, right? What about all those people out there who don't go to caves? Most normal people do not go into caves. So how are they gonna get that feeling? Maybe that's one of the things in a small way that we can pick up from this experience. In a way, your comment brought back a lot of memories for myself too. Thank you.
Michael, is there any way we can hear? There's two things I want to ask you. One is I'd like to hear what your experience was when the traumatic experience. Another thing, if you have 2 minutes, because we have a couple minutes, maybe tell us how you were cured from the fever, from the cave fever. That's an amazing story, an amazing lesson too. Short.
I don't know, just threw a curveball there. I have pretty much blacked out exactly what happened when I got stuck in that elevator shaft of a cave that was full of mud and I couldn't climb out. I don't remember how I got out. I mean, I got out, but in my eyes, it's somewhat miraculous. I also prayed for a miracle, so it fit very much, but I'm sure there's also a more normal explanation of how I climbed out, but I don't remember. And I mean, I understand, I talk to people who've been in car accidents and they don't remember because their psyche kind of blocked it out, so they won't have to deal with it. So apparently it was so terrible that I don't remember exactly what happened. But it's definitely today my biggest fear. It's so irrational. I am incredibly claustrophobic when I'm alone. When I'm with other people, it's totally different. So, and that's really, for me, a message, because I have to fight to get out of my little circle of myself. I have to have my job, which is working with other people. I have to be at Livnot and Livnot-like places where we're always focusing on community. And I need that. That's one of the things that was good that came out of it. The bad part is that there's still, things that I have to deal with, but everybody deals with fears of some kind. In the end, to make a long story short, I got really, really sick from cave malaria, but I was misdiagnosed and nobody knew that I had cave malaria. I didn't know I had cave malaria until many, many, many weeks later. And I'd already been in the hospital and they sent me home and it was really bad. And in the end, it was a naturalist doctor from England who came and had heard of my case and wanted to take a look at me. And he understood immediately that it was cave malaria, which is amazing in itself. And he said, "You've got to eat grapes." I was like, "What?" He said, you gotta eat grapes. What do you mean? He said, "Well, Maimonides says that you have to make kiddush over grapes, the fruit of the grape, and it's very therapeutic and it's important. It'll clean you out." And I was like, whatever. Because what I didn't know is one of the, it's kind of like Lyme disease, but not as bad. Lyme disease is a little worse. But one of the symptoms of cave malaria is apathy. You don't even care. You really don't even care about life. It's amazing how scary that is. That you can go from being a caring person to not caring at all. And I was like, whatever. So I was living on a kibbutz and they ordered grapes and I ate grapes and I got better. So I was like that Jonah in the bottom of I was running away. And the experience really was like that captain who said, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and call out." And so it was definitely transitional for me. And I think in general, as Aaron has always said, challenges build us. And this is a worldwide challenge now, and we can only hope that beside the people who are dying and are in great pain, and people who are in all kinds of pain, that hopefully when it's over, we will come out much stronger with a lot of understandings, both as humans, as Jewish people, and as singular people. That's our hope. Anyone else before we finish?
Hi, Michal, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can.
This is Dave. How are you?
Hi, Dave.
I can't help but be reminded of cocoons and chrysalis when you're speaking about time in a cave. And it seems like globally, this is a time that the world has been forced to slow down, focus much less on external things. And by virtue of being trapped in a space, start to look inward, focus that energy in that place, become more spiritual, become more connected to what is right in front of us, to our family members, to things that are in our very small radius. Be less global, be more local. And I think that's very healing for myself personally and people I've been connected to, and it seems like it's going to be a good thing for the world in a lot of ways.
It's a beautiful idea. I've got to write it down. Chrysalis. Beautiful. God, what a beautiful idea.
And quiet and slow down too. You know, being in a cave is being cut off in a very quiet place where everything's much slower, and that just has a different feeling to it. No?
So we're going to be beautiful butterflies, you promise?
Yeah.
It's just so sad that people have to pay a price for it. You know, if it was just like, you know, you get a fever, but your words are actually encouraging, because it's the only, we do have to focus on the positive instead of the negative, but there's so many people in pain now.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, beautiful idea. Chrysalis.
I'd like to suggest, if I can, that everybody here listening to Michael, I'm sure you know a lot of people from your groups that would also like to hear Michael and Yifat and Rav Meir. So if you could possibly send, Meir will send you a link to this afterwards, and if you could send it out to people from your group, we'd be really appreciated, and maybe get some more people hooked into us. Although there's thousands of things on social media now, there's no one like Michael and Yifat. And if you're not going to come to Tzfat, let Tzfat come to you a little bit. Everybody
Absolutely.
stay healthy and keep in your cocoon.
Yes, Toda, Aaron.
Thank you so much. This is so great.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I put the Facebook link for tomorrow's event, and if you go to Livnot, there's more Yifat's classes up there on Wednesday. We have more things going on, and it's amazing to see everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be here next week, B'ezrat Hashem. All right, stay safe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
David,
Michael.
for the butterfly idea.
Good to see
Beautiful.
you, David.
Litraot.
So good to see you all.
Bye-bye.
Litraot.